right? And Jasper's right in the middle of the band, right? So they're going to have the total, everything.
It's nice knowing you.
And, and so sure enough, I was like, oh, I got to definitely go in the office that day, right? So I could be there for it. I'm going to be in London,
Oh,
which is not going to have any of the eclipse.
I'm sorry.
We're actually going to drive up.
So I know y'all feel so sorry for me that I'm going to be in London, but it was so funny when I
Horrible.
What you gonna be there for this?
Serverless Architecture Conference. That's a really long name, but which is why everyone just call it Serverless Con. But but so because I was talking to someone at Jasper. And, oh yeah, that'll be great because they're going to do. I mean, they're going to actually close manufacturing and let people go outside and everything. And I'm like, oh yeah, that'd be cool. I'll be up here. And I'm like, oh wait, when is that?
The one of the last total eclipses that there was, me and Mitch went down to Russellville, Kentucky, where a couple of our friends live, and I remember we were in the middle of a field, and when it finally went to the total part, it was just like someone shut nature off because everything, or no, never mind. It was nature got turned powered up because all of a sudden all the bugs and everything just start making all this racket.
Mm-hmm.
And then as soon as the sun gets re-exposed, it's just immediate stop. Just silence. And we're just it was so odd. It was just so weird feeling.
All right, I'm gonna do one more checkout.
Loved
I came in last time. It's still open.
Oh, Mitch just got one. Again, Nest doorbell.
It's also a nice day out, so
It is very nice out.
So here's the problem about running user groups. If it's a nice day, if it's a crappy day, it has to be right in the middle that you'll get people who'll come, right?
Just comfortable enough out that it's not miserable, but not so comfortable that everybody's like, but we could be
Nice enough you're willing to leave your house. Not so much you want to be outside.
unless if you could somehow you'd have to have a portable screen, I guess, to do this, and maybe a portable hotspot. But if it's a really, really nice day, you have it at a park. And then maybe everybody would want to come because, one family member could go over.
No, because then you have, you want me to be outside?
Oh, true.
I'm allergic to the world.
These are tech people.
True.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they're like Mitch, who I don't know anymore.
Like I say, I noticed you have one guest, and I don't see that guest.
Yeah, he's willing to play poker, or should I say lose?
Yeah. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and get us started. And again, that's the hard part. We made it earlier this month. I was trying something, and admittedly, part of the reason why I was trying this is because we seem to stay out really late. Well, sure enough. I mean, like Steve, there's people have got to leave early because of there's family commitments, right? Anne, who normally shows, she's. I think she has a similar situation. I don't know why. I just know she has a reason why she leaves early. She always leaves early. So, we'll probably try this another month, and if 6:30 doesn't work, we'll move it back to 7. Right? It's it's being agile. So, all right, I'm gonna do my couple of quick slides here and. Exactly. It is giving reasonable accommodations to the group. See, I can use accessibility terms.
I mean, it is a hybrid group too, so also that.
All right. Hey, we have different sponsors this month. So sure enough, we're in a different way, which is probably also, I bet you someone's over at the other building. I'd be willing to bet.
As long as we're not in that office, because there'll be nothing there.
Well, that's quite true. But yeah, so glad to bring. I mean, Slingshot. I've done things with Slingshot over years. I've always been a great company. So it's, and I'm not sure what's going on with the food this month. I reached out to them this morning, reminded, hey, we're in a different place and everything, and no one responded. We'll get that straight.
You're saying the food and people are over there. They're eating the food and we're-
Well, there's also that possibility too. All right, so upcoming meetups. Yeah, I don't have anything listed, but I actually got things coming up. But nothing solidified yet. But I will have. I've been talking to a couple speakers who want to come in town and talk. One being our favorite Chapisky, so we'll see if he actually gets here on time. And of course, if you've been to a Chapisky meetup, it's rare. It's funny because Phil is really big about being on time, and especially for his sessions, it's a big deal for him. So it's kind of funny. He could never be on. He's almost never on time for Louisville.
There's always an accident.
So, and he and I are really good friends, so I like giving him a hard time. But one thing, we just changed this day. So May will be the fourth Thursday instead of the third Thursday. Because the third Thursday is a PGA week, which is a mess to begin with. And then it turns out that Dan can't be here anyways, and he's our host for this meetup. So I think it'll just be better anyways to get out of that mess. Plus, sure enough, wherever we go afterwards, it's probably going to be full of people because there's going to be so many people in town. So the other thing we do have scheduled, probably someone that most people here don't know, but Mike Eaton, he's going to come and talk about Spectre. He's a great speaker. You all will have a great time with that session. Funny thing is, he's really known for his soft skill talks. He's given me a hard time because I picked a tech talk. I said, but it's something different. I mean, different for him, but also, it's a real .NET stuff, right? So that's why I like that one. The Azure group is up and going, right? So, we've got that going. Funny thing is I helped get it started, and I've yet to been to one of the meetups since we started, because I have been on the road every single time that we've met. Funny one was this month. I was in Seattle, and someone's like, "Hey, you're on Twitch, but you're right here." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm streaming on Twitch right now." Some great topics. So observability. That's supposed to be April 14th, not March. So April, we've got observability. So that's the whole idea of things that are going on. Your logs and that type of stuff. May 9th, talk about what database to choose, because there is a lot of options to choose. Azure networking. Oh, I hate networking. So and then July is probably going to be me, and we're just trying to figure out what topic we want to talk about. So that's coming up. Some upcoming events. Nothing really local in the area. Yes, I am still trying to get the what will not be called Copalooza. And do not go to the Copalooza website. We have been hacked, and I cannot figure out how to fix it. You do not want to, especially in work setting.
I may have made a mistake.
Yes.
The other day. So that explains things. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I just chatted.
Well, so-
We went in a different direction.
so and the worst is I don't actually own the domain. So Ron Daggett, who was one of the original members of the committee, he went and bought the domain, and I don't know for how long he bought the domain, because I've never had paid for that domain. Well, he's passed away, so it's so I don't have control of the domain, but it's interesting. I have control of the domain space, right? I have the namespace, and I did create a new A record the other day, and for like 20 minutes, it didn't go to that site, but it also didn't go to the nasty site. But then I checked the next day, and it was back on the next nasty site. So yeah, don't go to the website. But we're going to try for this.
I'm gonna try to figure that
For this fall, we are going to try to have a code camp, so something a little smaller, which is good because the attendance was gotten smaller anyways. So, but some other events coming up. So Star Trek, I've talked about this before. This is a great event. Are you speaking of Star Trek? Okay. So it's in a movie theater. At the end of the day, they watch a movie, which is weird because all the movie strikes all cause problems. It's normally a Marvel movie, but this year it's going to be the Phantom Menace, because it's not the 40th, 20th anniversary of the Phantom Menace, whatever. It's a big 20th or 25th. So that's May 3rd. You know, that's always a great conference. Scenic City. Are you doing Scenic City?
Uh-uh.
So
I'm doing Cincy. Okay.
how do you know?
Probably, I mean, I know.
You are doing Cincy.
Oh,
I'm on the selection committee,
no.
so I happen to know that. So Scenic City is down in Chattanooga. What? Yeah, I could tell you for a fact you are. Yeah, Scenic City down in Chattanooga. Actually, it's a really nice event. They do a good job there. I'm going to be talking about central design patterns.
There's one missing on there.
What am I missing?
KCDC.
KCDC is farther away. That's the reason why I didn't put it on there.
Okay.
Yeah, even
That's
though
what
I
I'm speaking of.
yes, yeah. Well, they don't like me.
And
Um,
June as well, but that's like a fan like game, board games and all that convention, not a tech convention.
But then, yeah, and then Cincy Deliver, right, which is also, I mean, that's a great event. And while she assumed she was speaking, Arissa is actually going to be speaking at that. All right. So,
One more.
Huh?
One more.
What's that?
Plug. Derby City Data Days. There's going to be a sequel Saturday style thing here in Louisville at the Shelby campus. And it's through the Louisville Data Technology Group, meetup group.
so what was the name of it?
Derby City Data Days is the name
Okay,
of it.
that is okay.
And it's going through the
I heard the
Louisville-
Derby City. I didn't hear the.
Derby, it said too fast. Derby City Data Days. It's on the 13th of April, and it's going to be like just like a full Saturday, sequel Saturday workshop day. Well, not for that workshop, conference day.
Can you send me the details, and I'll email to the group as a whole. Are they still looking for speakers?
I have no idea.
I can't really do that one anyway, but
But it's going to be, yeah, it's all
that's
sequel
the
days.
day after I get back from London. I'm not going to schedule myself to.
You said it's Derby Data Days?
Derby City Data Days, and it's through the Louisville Data Technology Group here in Louisville on the so who also meet in this room.
Because for those who don't remember, last time I was in London, I had my gallbladder explode. So you know, it's as I was telling them, that can't happen this year. So I at least know I won't have gallbladder issues because it's gone.
Oh, she got
Oh,
get these.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So for those who don't know the story, so sure enough, I woke up one morning. The morning I was supposed to do an all-day workshop with what I thought was the worst indigestion I've ever experienced. It was not indigestion. I somehow made it through that day, got on a plane the next day to come back to the United States, landed at midnight. Actually, on the way home from the airport, I threw up. I mean, luckily we had a blanket, and I was able to at least do that in there. But my wife's like, "Oh, we should go to the emergency room." It's fine. I'm tired. I've been traveling all day. Yeah, I was in the emergency room 3 hours later, and not 12 hours after landing, I was on the operating table. So yeah, it's all right.
Someone just posted about Derby City Data Days in the event chat
Oh, cool.
comments.
So all right. So we always normally we go out to BJ's. That's a little bit further away now that we moved over here. So I'm willing to give the room options of where we want to go. So basically, it was Roosters, Brick House. I forgot your third option. It was a Mexican place, and I'm drawing a blank name of it. Yeah. So, and we don't have to decide right this moment, but at the end we'll decide where we're going. Definitely, everyone here is more than welcome to join. It's part of the great part about being here. All right. So this month, again, talking about like I got Mike Eaton coming, not doing a soft skill talk like he wants to do, but this month we're going to talk about accessibility, which is really, really important, right? And it's funny because there's a lot of lip service to accessibility, right? I was on a DoD contract, and we had to be 508 compliant, but yet we also had to have markers that were red and green, and I'm like, and they had to be red and green. I'm like, all right, well, we got to put text on it. Oh, that won't look good. Well, what are we going to do about the blind people who can't, or not blind, but the colorblind people who can't see those colors, right? I mean, so even when we're 508 compliant, we're not really compliant, right? It's lip service, and So, you know, and this is definitely Arissa's passion. So it's definitely great to have her coming in here. You know, I mean, Arissa is you know, everyone here has been at least a dozen events. So you've all seen Arissa around. I mean, she's been around. One of the great things about Arissa, you know, and a little bit of proud moment here, Arissa is now also a Microsoft MVP. So definitely congrats on that. You know, sure enough, I was just talking. Betsy's so happy that you made it through this time. Yeah, that's you know, there's only 3,000 some odd MVPs in the world, so you know it is pretty cool to get, especially someone who's not directly on one of the products, right? You know, so I'm an MVP, but I'm directly tied to products, right? You know, accessibility is not a product per se, so it's great to see. I mean, dev tech, everyone's dev tech.
I had a lot
It's a
of
big
fun.
it's a big category.
I had a lot of fun during like the summit because like there was one of the talks that I went to and I enjoyed the most, and it's one that I actually can talk about because it wasn't as NDA as like
Mhm.
the others, because it was like Microsoft Access and like accessibility, which I mean I hadn't heard anybody talk about access in like forever, so I was like, oh, okay, well it was like the only really accessibility focused talk there, so I was like, I have to go to that one. I had a good. Yep.
Oh, because I got unmuted also. There we go.
Okay. Oh, that was painful for a moment.
But now we hear you.
Oh no.
Hold on, wait for that to die. Let's try.
it built is with this kind of ideal user or ideal person in mind, and not really taking into account just how diverse people can be. So whenever we're using these tools to do accessibility testing, the easiest way I have found to kind of explain it is we're looking at, can users perceive, operate, and understand the content and functionality with or without the aid of assistive technologies? So kind of like if you think about like a job description, and there's always that line in there of, can you do these duties with or without reasonable accommodation? It's that. We're like, can someone interact with this and understand it and get a similar experience as anyone else with or without some form of assistive technology? And let me actually pull up my little notes here just so I make sure I'm not missing anything that I intended to cover. Because again, with this being like the first time I'm kind of giving this talk, I just want to sort of make sure of that. So with that in mind, what we're kind of looking at is we're looking at how accurately, clearly, and consistently content is being communicated. How consistently is the structure of an application or a website being communicated? How well are the relationships between information? So things like heading structure, that influences, is the content underneath it, like, does it describe it? Is that relationship being clear to people? If you've got like lists on a page, is it clearly communicated to the user that that's a list of items that they go together? Things like the function. So like making sure you're using links and buttons correctly, because they're not interchangeable, even though people too frequently treat them as such. Checkboxes versus radio buttons. Making sure that labels and inputs are actually like connected to one another, so that someone can actually figure out like how they're supposed to make use of a form, how they're supposed to fill it out. Making sure that they're putting in required information, and just making sure that in general, like any information on there is being clearly communicated. So like not just using color, using good contrast, having those accessible labels present. And one that people don't think about a lot of times is like making sure that you don't have images that are input through CSS. So like icons that might be added through something like Font Awesome or Foundation Fonts, Bootstrap. Sometimes there's those CSS icons that are input in there. And if you've got that as the only way that some information is being described, and yet maybe the user has to use a custom CSS to be able to see things properly or interact with things properly, and then all of a sudden those CSS images are gone, well, now that information is gone to them. So we kind of want to make sure, we're checking for those kinds of things just to make sure that everybody's kind of getting a fairly consistent experience. Because think about it from a visual perspective. When you look at a web page, and my brain is drawing a blank on his name right off, but he did the design talk a couple months back.
Jay Harris.
Yeah, Jay. So Jay, when he did his design talk, he kind of mentioned a couple of things that I'm about to say. And that is, like, when you visually look at a website, you're looking at how are things positioned on the page, proximity, general location, sizing of one thing compared to another, to sort of make certain assumptions about how they're related. For instance, if I look up at the top of this page here, I'm going to assume, okay, well, that content at the top is obviously kind of grouped together. That's probably the header. Oh, I see those, like, that text to the side that looks like it's individual text items. That's probably links that are the main navigation pages for the site. I'm going to assume, okay, well, there's content in the middle. That's the main content. I see some text is bigger than other text. Those are probably headings, so I can kind of use those to figure out where certain information might be on that part of the page. And then there's items grouped towards the bottom. I'm going to assume that's the footers. I'm going to make certain assumptions about what I'm going to find there. It's probably going to be like complementary sorts of links, social media information, or about pages for certain, like career pages for websites you tend to see down the footer, things like that. And so we're basically wanting to make sure that when someone's using a screen reader or other assistive technology, are they being communicated those same things? Are they getting that same information without maybe necessarily being able to have visual context there? Or are they able to get that same information if, say, again, kind of going back to the whole CSS images thing, if something happens and the CSS doesn't load in? Well, is the content on the page still going to be in a linear fashion, a way that the user can look at it and kind of still get what means what, at least to some degree? And things like the state of elements. So like back on that page, there was, for some of those headings, I had a little plus symbol next to it because they're actually expandable sections. So is the user going to have that communicated to them, that this is something that they can interact with, they can use it and it's going to expand and collapse information? So with all that in mind, we've got all that wonderful automation and AI tools and all that fun stuff out there. Why not just automate it? Why not, some of the tools I'm going to show you here in a little bit, they are automation. So why not just use those and take some of the guesswork out? Well, I mean, again, we use some of them, but they're not perfect. And, they're not necessarily going to catch the intent and the true purpose of the content that is there. For instance, here I've got the Lighthouse tool in the Chrome and Chromium Edge browser. And you'll notice, so I've got a HERD score at the top there, but then there's this list of other content at the bottom, and those are all things that it suggests that I should manually check. I should manually confirm. Because the good tools are going to admit that there are things that they're not necessarily going to get right. Like a great example is, here I've got Azure AI Vision Studio. You've got things like ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini now from Google, it used to be Bard. That they often have like these tools, kind of like this one here, where you can say, hey, generate a description of an image. And here it's generated the text, a woman sitting in a statue with the Ghibli Museum in the background. Well, now, I am pretty amazed that it got Ghibli Museum, because that is the Studio Ghibli Museum in Mitaka, Tokyo, Japan. But it is, I'm not in the statue. Be kind of painful, I think, if I was. And it didn't really give any detail about the statue. It's a robot from one of the, I forget the full name of the anime, but Laputa. And also, again, it said I'm in the statue when I'm in front of it. And depending on the purpose of that image, I might want a more, well, for one, I'm at least going to want it to say that I'm standing in front of it. But I might want to provide additional detail about how I look. What is that statue behind me? If the statue is meant to be the main focus of the image, I might want to provide a lot more detail. And so AI, it does a lot. Automation, it gets a lot of things great, and it gives you a good starting spot, but it's not going to always catch things quite right. And especially like in web design, you can have things that are technically semantically correctly coded, like the tags and everything are written correctly, but AI is not going to necessarily know whether the purpose and intent matches the semantics. So some examples of different tools that you'll often see used in accessibility testing. Bookmarklets, which all those are is it's a little JavaScript snippet that you can drag up into your bookmark bar in your browser, and then you can click it at any point in time and it'll activate some sort of little script, make basically a little app. Some of them are very complex and straight up just look like full-blown apps themselves. And some are as simple as just highlighting what it recognizes as programmatically a heading on the page. And some of them are just as complex as the Andy tool that I have listed there, which is made by the Social Security Administration. And it opens up a full app across the top of the page and lets you go through and check table structure, images, focusable links, buttons, all kinds of fun stuff. So those are really nice. They're lightweight. They tend to be very lightweight, very simple to use. you tend to not worry quite as much about compatibility issues because they're not having to really install quite as much into the browser. It's just running all on its own. Browser extensions, on the other hand, those are actually like little applets that are getting installed into your browser. Some of them, there'll be like a little icon that'll pop up and you can click and it's running that extension. Some of them will be under like DevTools, because like Axe DevTools actually loads up as a tab under the developer tools in your browser. And they'll do a lot of different things, and kind of like the bookmarklets, some of them are really, really complex. Some of them are very, very simple. Wave, for instance, just puts an overlay over a page, and it'll highlight where different errors are. Axe DevTools can be, how complex it is kind of depends on whether or not you're using the paid or the free version. Because the free version has just automated tests. The paid version actually goes through, has some automation and like some additional, like more complex automated tasks and that kind of thing. Then you have standalone desktop apps. So things like Color Contrast Analyzer from the Picello group. TPGI is how you often see it displayed. PDF Accessibility Checker from the PDF Universal Accessibility Foundation, which checks for PDF accessibility issues. Photosensitive Epilepsy Analysis Tool is a good one. That one I will forewarn, if you do check that one out, it's actually out of date right now. They've got a update coming out, hopefully. I know that it's planned, but I don't have an ETA on that one. And then there's some of them that are assistive technologies themselves. So things like ZoomText, which is a magnification and reader tool. Fusion, which is a mixture of ZoomText and the JAWS screen reader. Dragon, which is a voice dictation and control application. And then, of course, there's screen readers. So JAWS, which is a paid one from Freedom Scientific. NVDA, which is the one I'll be using today, and it's actually a free and open source one. Highly, highly recommended. It's great. It has a lot of customization to it for people. Those two are both Windows specific, as well as Narrator, which is the one that's built into Windows. VoiceOver is the screen reader that you will see on macOS and iOS. And then TalkBack is the Android version, which I've actually used that one a lot myself. And I will say, like, it is a good idea, even if you are not doing testing, even if you don't actually need it for your day-to-day. I highly, highly, highly recommend that everybody at least learn some basics of using the screen readers that are available for whatever devices you use. Even if you use Linux, because Linux does have one that you can get for it called, I think, Orca, if I remember right. Because it can come in handy. I've had times where I've had to go to eye doctor appointments and I've had my eyes dilated and I couldn't see anything for a little bit. And I needed to call someone, but again, can't see my phone. But I was able to I knew how to turn on TalkBack. I turned on TalkBack and I was able to actually sit there and navigate my phone and make a phone call without having to sit there and wait 2 hours for my eyes to finally let me see things. So yeah, it's a good idea. And then too, if there's always that risk, if nothing else, because we all get older one day, there's always that chance that your sight could go bad. And if you have some basic knowledge, you're going to have a much easier time adapting potentially one day. Or if you have an accident and something happens, you never know. And then another one I've got listed here, I just wasn't sure what kind of category to put it under, because it's kind of a all over the place one, and it's one I found out recently called AxeLinter. It's available for Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code. It's available as a CI/CD pipeline tool and a few other things. And it's really, really useful. It just pops up like in Visual Studio Code, which is where I primarily use it. It's a linter, and it'll show like the little inline examples of like where you might have accessibility issues present. Now, with any of these tools, and especially with the screen readers, it is good to kind of keep in mind that there can be some known issues. And this kind of helps a lot, like if you are doing testing, because you want to know, okay, is the issue I'm running into actually because of something the devs did? Or is it something that, hey, there's something with the platform that we're running on that's causing this? And maybe there's a workaround, or maybe there's not really a workaround. And that way you can have that documented. Some of these you might just already, end up knowing. Some of them, it might be that, hey, you send it off to the dev to try to fix it. They can't figure out what's wrong. You do some research, you find out. A lot of development companies have their issue trackers that you can look through. And of course, there's also, Google. Anybody in tech, Google's probably always your number one tool just about for anything. And I've got a couple of examples here. So like, for instance, a known issue on Android is TalkBack doesn't always read when fields are marked as required, even if you use ARIA required. Just doesn't for some reason. From what I know, it's been an issue since 2017 and they just haven't fixed it. Don't know why. Another one is on macOS and iOS. If you're using VoiceOver and Safari, it's a feature. And they've actually, from what I understand, Apple has just straight up said that it's an intended behavior. If you have an unordered list and you remove the list styling, it just ignores the VoiceOver will just ignore that it's a list and not announce it, which can be problematic because there's a lot of benefits in accessibility for things being recognized as a list, because then someone has an idea of, okay, there's 10 items in this list. So if they can't see it, obviously being able to hear that there's 10 items, knowing where they are in that list can be helpful to either reading through it or if they want to skip it to get to something else. And I think I saw.
So it's a UL item, but the bullets are not showing.
Yeah, so if you remove the list stylings, kind of like you'll see people use that a lot of times for lists of navigation links at the top of their screen or in the footer or something. When it's gonna otherwise be visually obvious that it's a list to someone, and the bullets are not necessarily needed for someone to know that. But again, then you run into this issue. There is a workaround. You can kind of use ARIA roles, which I typically kind of advise against because you're supposed to limit and only use ARIA really if you have to. But this is actually an example of where, if you want to make sure that that list aspect is still communicated, it might be good to use those in that case. Oh. And kind of with that, kind of in relation to that, there are common testing combinations that people will use. Obviously, it's going to kind of depend on what operating system you're running on, what screen readers are available, what browsers. The most important thing about this is whenever you're doing testing, unless you're in an environment where you're going to have a very limited scope of what's available. So say a kiosk. If someone's testing on a kiosk, it's a fairly locked down system. So there's going to be only a limited number of things that you're going to be able to really test with there. More and more kiosks are having where people can plug in headphones for them, for instance, and there'll be a screen reader, especially because JAWS actually has a JAWS for kiosk, or I don't know if they actually made it or if it was someone else that basically added onto it to make it where it would work on kiosks. Or if it's a kiosk that happens to be running Windows in the background, then obviously there would be the potential there to have JAWS or something installed on it. But again, that's going to be a very kind of locked down space, and so you're going to be kind of a little bit more limited in what combinations of hardware, software such you're testing with. But as much as possible, when it isn't as locked down, you want to test with as many combinations of, say, screen readers and browsers as you can, just to sort of get an idea for okay, are we going to experience any issues on Firefox that we're not seeing on Chrome that we need to work around? Because if you've got something that's open to the public, it's kind of the old, you hear the joke about, well, it works on my machine. Well, we're not shipping your machine out to everybody, I don't think. So you want to try to get that more what your user is going to be experiencing. And with that, it is demo time. And hopefully I don't have demo goblins going on here causing trouble. I built a little really, really crummy test page so I could kind of show this off. I did have a couple of things before I go turning on a screen reader here. I do just want to say a couple of things. Whenever you're using a screen reader, a few things to kind of be aware of. First off, typically when you first install one, it's going to be set by default. They usually give you options when you install them, but sometimes those aren't there. But they'll typically start after logon by default. So if you're not actually a daily screen reader user, you're probably going to want to turn that off. If you say you get it installed and that doesn't happen, you can usually go into like, there's always going to be a setting there, like some sort of startup setting where you can turn it off. You can have it start on the login screen after login, or not at all unless you start it up. If you want to play around with like JAWS or some of the other screen readers, JAWS is one in particular that they have a demo of it, but it's a 45-minute demo. And it's not 45 minutes from when you log in or anything, or when you start it up. It's 45 minutes from when you power on the computer. So like you get to the login screen, that 45-minute timer has started. So if you sit there for 45 minutes and then you try to start it up, it's going to be like, nope, sorry, got to restart. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind with that one in particular. Another thing is all of your screen readers, most of the key combinations that you're going to see are going to be fairly consistent. They keep kind of a similar set of key combinations across them all. There's always a modifier key, which is just, it's kind of like doing like a Windows command when you use the Windows key. That Windows key is basically a modifier key to another key combination. Typically, that modifier key is insert, control, or caps lock, and it's usually very locked down what you can switch it to, which can be kind of frustrating. It's sort of an intentional thing because they want to control like what system-based key combinations you might be interfering with to kind of limit some of that issue. Even Narrator uses the same set of like modifier keys, or VoiceOver on Mac OS uses the same sets of keys. So that's just something else to kind of keep in mind. They're also going to often have like different modes that they can operate in. And this is something that can really trip you up really quick because you'll be sitting there tabbing through and suddenly tabbing isn't functioning right, or certain key combinations aren't working, and it's usually because you've switched the modes. And the modes are typically a form of focus or browse. So it's like going back and forth between, like if you tab through a website, you're typically tabbing through all the interactive elements on the page. So sometimes when you switch mode, that won't do that. And it can confuse you real quick. Usually the key combination to switch that is insert space, or whatever your modifier key is, plus the space bar. I just like to mention that because I have run into moments where I thought my computer was broken and I realized I just switched the modes on the screen reader because it was still running in the background muted. Oops. You can usually you can find like examples of those key combinations. So like for everybody here, I actually have like a little sheet printed out that's from DQ University. They have one for VoiceOver, one for Mac, one for VoiceOver, one for Narrator and NVDA, and I think they might have one for like the mobile, like TalkBack and iOS, or VoiceOver on iOS. But if you want a copy, just to be able to see those, or again, they are free online. So if you just go to DQ University and search for screen reader key combinations, they'll probably come up. They have them as like a little one sheet PDF, or they have them as like a longer list. Let's see. What is the other thing I wanted to kind of That was all I really had for that part. So I guess now it's to get into the actual demo portion of this. I kind of built this like little mock website up. It'll actually be in the repo once I update the main branch, and I'll make sure to share a link to this on the Meetup event page in case you all want to check it out. And no, I do not want to update right now. That is the last thing I need to do.
Oh, come on, do it.
It actually did an update just before I came over here. That was part of why I was running late, because it was going through the whole, like, every so often when Windows updates and it does makes you set up stuff again. I'm like, oh, come on, really? I didn't even know it had updated. I was like, why? But the nice thing is like this little test page, again, it'll be in the repo. I actually have a whole bunch of different resources that I've mentioned kind of listed in here, as well as just if you go to corgidev.com. Oh, and I just realized that NVDA is actually talking in the background right now. Mute that just momentarily. But if you go to my accessibility page on corgidev.com, I do also have a whole lot of awesome resources for like testing, including a lot of different bookmarklets, the browser extensions and such that I mentioned and I had listed earlier. So let's see. Let me unmute NVDA, and hopefully I'm not going to.
Adjust the output volume 15. 33. 30.
Ooh.
Testing pages accept.
You got
I don't know what I need to do because the screen reader can't. Well, wait, that's right. Never mind. I know what I had planned for this, just in case we had audio issues like this. There is the lovely speech viewer. It won't be quite as nice for like people that are here. Maybe I don't know how well you can read what's on there, and I can't really enlarge it. But hopefully it'll still give you a pretty good idea of like kind of how things are going to work on this. So I'm just going to kind of navigate this page sort of how I would if I was doing accessibility testing. So again, like I mentioned earlier, typically you go to a site, you expect for just the interactive elements to be in the tab order, because you will see devs occasionally. I actually had a page I tested this past week where the devs had randomly put all the headers and a whole bunch of paragraph text and like labels and stuff into the tab order. And that's obviously not good because, again, it's supposed to be only the interactive elements should be in the tab order. So if you've got things that are able to be tabbed to, but they don't do anything and someone can't visually see what's going on, they're not going to necessarily know, are things broken? Is something opening somewhere and it's not being communicated to me? So that's why, like, we try to defer against that, we try to like tell people to not do that. So like right here, like I tab through and it's just like all my different like little form elements and such being tabbed through. Now, one important thing too is like, it's like when I tab to, like, for instance, the skip to main content link, it's being communicated as a link. If, for instance, someone had used a button element there instead, that would also potentially cause confusion because links and buttons are not interchangeable. Buttons are supposed to like perform an action, submitting a form, opening a modal. They're not supposed to take you somewhere. And so if they're unexpectedly taking you somewhere because someone has actually maybe used some JavaScript magic to make it navigate somewhere, that's going to really be confusing for people. If someone is unable to actually see what's going on, they're not going to know, have I just suddenly been redirected somewhere that I shouldn't be? Is something wrong? Is something doing something it's not supposed to be doing? So even from like a security perspective, there's these things that we tell users from a security perspective to like watch out for, being redirected places. So you could make someone think something has really gone wrong when in reality it's just opened up a little modal to like notify them of something. And I mean, sure, they'll be able to probably figure it out after a moment if they move around, if things are actually otherwise accessible, but you've just made for a really poor user experience at that point. So let's see. So like, for instance, like here, I've got like these different links across the top here. Each one is being communicated as a button or a link. And then another thing you'll kind of notice is, let me see if it does it again this time. Okay. Like when I first tabbed into that and it actually like recognized it as a list. So I talked about earlier, I mentioned like the importance of like the list structure and how like, for instance, what happens with VoiceOver and Safari, how that can cause problems. So like, for instance, here, I'm able to actually see that I'm on a list and I'm able to like actually know where I'm at in that list as I tab through. Let's see. We have like these different little bits of information that we're checking for. Like when I'm testing, I'm checking to make sure like is the fact that like an element is required being communicated. So kind of going back to like the talkback issue that I talked about earlier. Here you notice like I've got this first name field. The label is communicated. It's been programmatically connected to it, so it's being communicated. If that label wasn't programmatically linked to that input, I would tab to it, and that's required, and it's blank right now. That can be problematic. I actually had at one point when I worked at the American Printing House for the Blind, we had updated to different copiers. And one of the copiers in particular had this, it was a little color matcher tool because one of the design departments was on the same floor that it was on. And there was an alternative print driver we found out later that was didn't have all the color matching stuff in there for people that didn't need it. But the default one that went with it for that color matcher was entirely inaccessible to a horrible extent. And there's nothing more frustrating when you're trying to like explain to someone that, okay, look, none of the labels are getting read off. They can't tab to half of the interface. So they have no idea what's going on. They're not able to print anything. And there's nothing more irritating than having someone tell you, well, they just need to tab 3 times and then they can see that this is highlighted. Well, they can't. No, they can't. They're using the screen reader for a reason. It's because they're either low vision or they're blind. They're not necessarily going to be able to perceive it, and it's not reading off anything, so they're also not auditorially like hearing that it's highlighted anything. So like that's the thing. We're looking for like, is this information that I would visually get from looking at this being also communicated to the assistive technology? And if it's being communicated accurately and it's being communicated consistently, that's also going to hopefully mean that if it's coded in a way that's, understandable. So if someone's using, you'll typically use screen readers in assistive testing, but, I mentioned like Zoom Text and Dragon and other tools like that earlier. If it's consistently communicated here, if I'm consistently able to navigate it with either a keyboard only or keyboard and mouse, then there's a decent chance that if someone's using another piece of assistive technology that's going to be looking for similar things to interpret those elements, it's going to communicate it consistently to them. Now, one that like the screen reader and like the keyboard testing won't get, and it unfortunately doesn't really get tested maybe as frequently as it should. I think if you use Axe DevTools though, it picks it up. And that's if like elements have, you've got IDs and classes when you're building a website. IDs are only supposed to be used once per page. They should not be used multiple times. Classes, it's cool to use them multiple times. The reason that that's important is, for one, you're making sure that things aren't conflicting. Because if you have 2 things that have the same ID and you try to apply like a formatting to that ID, you could end up changing things you don't mean to change. But for instance, with Dragon, naturally speaking, part of the way that a user who's using Dragon navigates a page, because you'll frequently see people that have maybe fine motor control, maybe they have arthritis, and so they have difficulty with doing a lot of typing, and so they'll use Dragon to actually give commands to navigate through the page. Well, one of the ways that they do that is Dragon will actually list all the IDs, and then they can tell it, okay, go to this ID, and it'll navigate to that element. Well, then now if you've got two elements that have the same ID, it can cause some conflict there.
Yes, I have seen on a lot of pages, especially dynamically generated ones, that the IDs are also dynamically generated.
Yeah.
Is that something that comes up a lot, or you'll be going through the IDs and you'll get like element dash 5728B or whatever? Because I've seen that a lot on some pages.
I don't think it does. Is like as long as each one is still unique, it's not as bad. It's obviously it's going to make it a little bit more difficult for them to like maybe say it, but they may also if they still have some ability to use keyboard as well, they can still because they'll also get like a list usually, and I'll actually show like one instance. Like it'd be something kind of like I always have to remember to do this differently on my keyboard because I've got that function key. And this is also kind of a reason why having things like listed properly as like links, buttons, etc. is so important. Is most screen readers and even a lot of other assistive technologies, they'll typically have an option like this where it's a elements list. So like for instance here, I've got like a section that's all the links on the page. So as long as things are recognized as links, they're going to show up here. And this is also why it's really super important to have descriptive links and not just click here, learn more. Because otherwise there'd be like 10 learn mores here and okay, we'll have no idea which one's which. Or do they just all do the same thing? I don't know. Having proper heading structure, because obviously if this was like poor heading structure, you'd have things you wouldn't necessarily be able to find what you're looking for in this. So I mean, it's kind of they get something kind of similar, like if like that, if with the IDs, they'll have like a list and they can sometimes go through it as well like that.
The reason I ask is because the IDs are usually developer facing.
Yeah.
So we don't tend to always use the best names for them, and if they are dynamically generated per page basis.
Well, in the sense with like Dragon, like in particular, because it's the main one that is going to use like IDs, and those it tends to be a lot more like someone that's visual, so they're also going to have like the visual context of things. Because I think it does put something up.
Oh.
It's kind of like when I open up like kind of like when I open up like PowerPoint here and I hit Alt and it'd be like that.
Oh, okay.
So it'd be something kind of like that.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so there'd be some extra context there. I mean, again, it's good to try to have them named well, but like you said, like with the dynamic one, it's not always going to be as possible, but as long as they're unique, that's going to be the important part for that.
I see. I do have a second question about the links. You say that they help to have descriptive titles. One of the patterns we have on our site is a table where each element can be edited on its own page. They're all links on the right-hand side, but they all say edit, 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 edit. What would be a good way to handle that? This is really a distinctive thing to call one of those.
Well, like, are you meaning like it's editing something specific though?
It's going into a separate page that edits more details about that table row, if you will.
Well, in that case, what you can do is you can actually, one, if it's in a table, they're going to have the rest of that row. As long as it's a properly formatted table, they'll have the rest of that row. But in cases like that where, it kind of makes sense for the labels to be the same because it's performing the same function, it's just against something else. You can use like ARIA described by to link it to something else that will add that extra context.
Okay, like first name, last name.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like for instance, say you've got you've got contact cards and they all have an edit button at the top of them.
Right.
You could say edit and then, like you said, like first name, last name, or some combination, something like that.
That's cool. That helps put the element on the label itself too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing, and that's kind of where some of the idea that like you'll have the myth that accessibility has to be like ugly and stuff, and it's like, well, no, sometimes there are ways. Like, I mean, I'll even use my slides as kind of an example. So, like for instance, on my PowerPoint slides, I've got these two additional. I might have to close the speech viewer because it's being a. Why isn't it closing? Huh. Oh wait, no, I know why that is. It's because I've got this open. It's like when you have another application open and you open a settings window. So like for instance on here, I've got these 3 slides that are for my what are we looking for portion. And you have to have a title on each of your PowerPoint slides for it to be accessible. It's kind of like having a page title on a website. Well, but I wanted to be able to have this image as big as I could on that particular slide so that people would actually be able to see enough of the detail for it to make sense. So what I did is there is still a title on there, it's just hidden, so you don't see it. So it's enough there that like there's that still that description. If someone navigates to this or if they're seeing a list of the slides, there's still a name there.
That's cool.
Yeah, like a similar trick I've seen people do is like if you have a website and for someone that is visual, maybe having a big H1 text label across the top doesn't really make any sense. Like they're going to know what it is, kind of. But for someone that is sight impaired, having that extra context can be very helpful. So sometimes what you'll see people do is they'll use screen reader only text. A lot of things like I think to some there's some frameworks and such that just have it built into it. Like if you're building like some web content. But there's like screen reader only text you can often use. If you just look up like screen reader only text, they've usually got like a little class too that you can just throw in your CSS to use it. And all it does is it just like moves it off the screen and it makes it so it doesn't gain keyboard focus. But if someone was to pull up a list of the headings, it would still display as a heading. Let's see, what's another good one? So let's see. Okay, so I mentioned like state being like communicated and like if something's expanded, collapsed. So like for instance, I've got this little accessible date picker here that I literally just pulled this from the W3C's authoring practices guide. And you'll notice like here on the screen reader, when I first tab to it, it actually does announce that it's a date combo box, collapsed, it's editable. I have the date format listed there. All of that is programmatically, just like if I'm visually going to this, that's being communicated to me. And if I enter something in, it picks it up. If I open it, it has announced that it's all the information for it. It's telling me like different things about where I'm at. Since this is done as a table, it's telling me like where on the dates I'm at. I can tab through it because things are properly a button the way that they're supposed to be to select things, and it tells me like what I've now entered into that field. All of that information that I visually would get is still being communicated to someone who can't necessarily see it, and with enough context that they're able to get the same information out of it that I would. Kind of like with the links versus buttons, checkboxes and radio buttons are another one. Now it's okay for like, the visual appearance. Typically, you see radio buttons done as a circle, checkboxes as a box. And it's good to stay to that sort of a standard just because it's familiar to all your users at that point. It's that like familiar look where people can kind of visually look at it and know what it's meant to do. They'll have an idea. It's not going to surprise them. They're going to know how to interact with it. It's kind of the whole idea of like, don't reinvent the wheel. If it works, it works. But it's also important, to make sure that the semantics are matching up with that so that like it doesn't get communicated incorrectly to someone that's not visually seeing it. Because there's the same thing that's going to happen. If you use a radio element, which are meant to be where one option is selectable. If you're using radio buttons, only one of the options should be selectable. It should never be a multi options available to select. So like for instance, here I've got my little list of like, what is your highest level of education attained? Which another thing you'll notice there, when I tabbed to it, it actually did read off the group label because I have them put together as a field set. There's different, depending on what you're building, if you've got elements that need to be grouped together, it's kind of like with the list. The list is informing the user that there's a group of elements and they're related in some way. And a field set for different inputs on a form is going to do the same thing. I ran into an issue here recently where someone had a zip code field, and it was the one where it's split into two parts. So you have like the little 5 digits and the 4 digits, and they didn't have them grouped. So the first one would read off zip code. The second one was just blank. Well, I mean, visually, I could see the proximity. I knew what those two were meant to do. But to someone who can't see it, there's just suddenly this extra field here that does nothing. And if you've made that required too, that they have to include the other part, well, they have no idea. So like that would be an instance. Now you don't have to have a visual label necessarily in that case, because again, visually it makes sense. They're next to each other and that zip code label is right there. So it's obvious visually that they go together. But if it's not programmatic as well somehow, then you run into that issue where that grouping isn't being communicated to someone who can't necessarily perceive that context, or in the event that, say, I mentioned the CSS styling thing a few times, or if you're even doing like JavaScript to some degree, because sometimes people use JavaScript to do some of the styling. If you haven't like grouped it properly in the code, if either one of those things gets messed up, that can be lost. But if you've still grouped them together like with field set or something, there's still going to typically be some sort of a indication that they go together that's going to display just by default, by basic browser defaults, because browsers have all kinds of defaults for how they do these things. Like for instance here, this is the typical way that a browser is going to display a field set, having that visual boxing around them and then the group label at the top. So again, even if my CSS styling and my JavaScript and everything that's running on this didn't load, it would still do that. It would still be communicated to the user that, hey, these things go together. And this is what their group label as well as their individual labels. And again, because it's being communicated that it's a radio button, they'll know, okay, I can only select one. I'm not going to be able to select another one. You can also, of course, and then like you've got the checkboxes. Again, because they're actually programmatically communicated as a checkbox, I can make that inference, even if I couldn't see this, that, okay, those are going to be, I can check all of these if I wanted to. It wouldn't matter. You do run into some issues though too, because like it used to be that checkboxes, it was just checked, not checked. But now you can also have like the partial, and that's where state also kind of comes back in there. We're making sure that state's being communicated. So here you'll notice it says the group label, sandwich condiments. It mentions that it's a grouping. It says that I'm on the all condiments checkbox, and then it's half checked. So if I didn't have that state communicated there, and it just said it was checked or unchecked, or it just didn't communicate that at all, like someone's not going to necessarily know that they've got multiple things checked while they're going through this. Versus now, like it says half checked, so I know there's at least one thing that's already checked in that list. If it was checked, I'd know, oh, okay, well, all the stuff is checked. Maybe I need to uncheck something. There's all that information that's being provided to someone, and it's all because it's programmed in the back the way that it's supposed to be. Here I've got like a little drop down. I've just got my little drop down list of like fruits. Let me know what I'm checking. There's all that communication that's kind of going on in the background. Now the other thing too is like because I've got this all communicated properly, obviously I've got like the little skip to content link at the top of the page that you commonly see. But if I've got things programmed correctly, I'm also giving people an opportunity to skip things a different way. Because if you think about it, when you visually look at a page, again, you're looking at like where the headings are, you're looking at what they say, and you're able to kind of like skip down the page real quick just based on like the headings. If there's good visual heading structure, you can just fly down that page and quickly skim it and find what you're looking for. And similarly, again, like if I pulled this up earlier, but I pull up that element list, and now I can sit here and I can go, make sure I get back up to it. There we go. I go over to my headings. I can just go down, and just like I would if I was visually looking at this, I can go straight down to like where the table is. Just the way kind of like you're giving that similar experience regardless of how the person is interacting with it. They may slightly go about controlling it a little bit differently, but they're still getting kind of that similar experience. And again, that's the big thing we're looking for when we're doing any kind of accessibility testing is we're looking for everybody being able to get a similar experience within reason, because again, they're going to navigate differently. And we're looking for is that are they getting the same information? Because again, if they're not getting the same information, there could be a lot of miscommunication. There could be like problematic assumptions made. There was a lot of problem. I mean, for instance, during COVID, I mean, obviously it's still going on to some degree, but like at the height of it, there was a lot of people. There was a very high number of people that died who had disabilities, and a lot of it came from the fact that they didn't have equal access to the information they needed to be able to understand where they needed to go for testing, what things, precautions they needed to take, how they could get, what equipment could they maybe get for themselves to take care of themselves. And again, it was because there was a lot of accessibility issues. I mean, think about you go into a store and, you know, when they were really, really pushing the whole stay 6 foot apart, and there would be those little stickers on the floor. Well, that's great for people that can see those stickers. Really doesn't do squat for someone that can't see it, though. And then, or they'd have like signs up somewhere that would have things, and it would be like, again, it's a visual sign, like you're not providing any other way for someone to know. And that's where accessibility is so key, is we're making sure that we're providing the same information to people that they can make informed decisions on what they buy, where they go. They can gain news and information, even if all it is they're just wanting to learn about an anime they enjoy. Like having that information be, you're also giving them equal access to just enjoy life and live, to work, to learn, to do whatever. And that's why this is like so, that's part of why I'm like so passionate about it, because when I worked at the printing house, I unfortunately, like with the printing situation, I saw a lot of times where I'm like, I didn't realize how much I took for granted, how easy it was for me to do certain things. Purely by virtue of the fact that, I mean, I have my eyesight, but that could go away anytime. I had a colleague, this happened before I started working where I'm at now, but I had a colleague that he tragically lost his sight. Just had an accident, suddenly it's gone. He's a programmer. He is having to entirely relearn how to use Visual Studio, how to use like all of his different applications and stuff that he depends on. And that's a frightening thing to think about. But again, if we can make things accessible, we can make that a lot less frightening a prospect for someone. Now, kind of going back on here on this test website, you know, I'm kind of talking about different ways that people are able to kind of skip through information. Now, say you were actually looking for this table here on the page. That was specifically what you were going here to look for. Visually, I'd be able to just scroll down really quick, see the table, stop, and navigate it. I could see the different colors of the cells, the text, how things are formatted, and again, making inferences based on that visual appearance and how things are grouped. And similarly, with someone who is using a screen reader, they can kind of do the same thing. Here I've hit the letter T. There's actually a lot of really, really super simple key combinations in screen readers. H, for instance, will automatically typically go through headings. T is typically the one that's used to go through the different tables on the screen. There are a few other like little combinations that are used if you're like wanting to go like through from cell to cell, row to row. But I mean, just doing like T, I went straight to this table and I'm automatically told that it has 8 rows, 6 columns, and I'm in column 1, and it's a certification title. Technically, well, no, okay, it read it. Never mind. Okay, I do have it linked, right? So I could also read the fact that there's that table element heading above it. So that way, technically, that should be a much more descriptive label for that table. But I made this last night. I tried. Literally just last night. So like I get all that information from it. Like I think on my actual page I have it. It says badges and certifications. So like if you go to that table, it actually says badges and certifications, and then it lets you know like where you're at in the table. Now on tables, there's also of course the fact that I can have a table that is just table elements, table rows, and table cells. Again, someone visually looking at it is going to be able to still probably figure out some aspects of that table. But there's other things that I need to do if I'm wanting to properly communicate. If it was just table cells, when someone went through this and say they go down and here I'm able to hear column 2, date issued. Let's see. Okay, so now I get down to row 2. You'll notice when I get down to row 2 where I've got my MVP certification listed, it actually is giving me that extra information that certification title is the heading for that column. It's telling me what's the value that's actually in the cell. And if I go, I don't remember how I have to go over. I always forget like which ones are. So I'm using Control Alt right arrow, and I'm able to then go to the next column, and it's telling me that. I think I actually don't have this one completely set up right, because there's ways you can do it where if someone navigates from cell to cell, it'll actually tell them what the row heading is. But even so, like even here, like, I mean, again, I'm getting into that next cell and it's still telling me that date issued is that column header. And that's why like I need to have like my table headings. Even if it's like the row heading, you know, you still make sure, because that's one thing I see a lot of people do is that they'll have like the column headings, but then they won't have the row headings designated with THs as well, because they think the THs are just meant for the column headings. And it's like, no, you also use that for your row headings. There's also other like scope elements and stuff that you can use too to help with that. And again, like, I mean, that's all getting communicated there to the screen reader. I would still count this as like passing in this case. Again, I might even be using the wrong command right now to go through it, I think. But, you know, it's actually telling me like all that information that someone visually would get. Let's see. Oh, actually, this is a good opportunity for me to show something else. Okay, so I mentioned earlier, like CSS images and making sure that those aren't like the only way that the information is being communicated. So here you'll notice I've got that little icon, and I think probably pretty sure everybody in this room, you see that little box with the arrow pointing out, and you have a pretty good idea of like what that visually stands for. Open in a new, just let someone know that it opens in a new window. Now, even if that image was to not load, I'm actually not going to do it. I'm not going to disable the styling right now because I think this actually gets really, really messy right now if I do that. But even if like the CSS didn't load, because of the way I have that set up, here, I'll just do like DevTools because that'll be an easy way to show it. I think it's, yeah, there it is. Okay. So you notice right here after where that little icon is, I've got this span that's got SR-only as a class on it that has the open in new window. So that text is there in a separate span. If the CSS for some reason did not load, obviously that SR-only styling would not get applied as well. That text would then become, the icon wouldn't be visible anymore, but that text would become visible. So even if that image doesn't load, there is still that text there. It's kind of like if you've ever gone to a page and the images are broken, So like, for instance, if I go like here, I've got those badge icons. Let's see. I'm actually gonna close that for just a second, because this will be an easy way to show this part here. Oh, that's right. I need to get rid of that folder when I get a chance. Okay. So I'm just going to rename that just enough to break them intentionally. Intentionally breaking things. That's the best part of doing testing, is you get to break stuff and not get in trouble for it. So here you'll notice the images now are broken. They did not load. But because I've got alt attributes on every single one of them, there's still that text that shows up. That text is still there. So no matter what, someone's still going to know, okay, that's Microsoft Most Valuable Professional MVP 2023 badge. Achievements in Accessibility, Accessibility in Action badge. They're going to still get all that information. And similarly, if someone with a screen reader was going through these right now and was going through those images, they would also, because that text is still there, they're still going to know, oh, okay, that's what's meant to be there. They're still going to get that same information, just like everybody else. I'm just going to leave it broken for now because I don't feel like refreshing this. Okay. Oh, I guess I should open up that speech viewer again, because otherwise nobody's knowing what the screen reader's saying. This will actually be my last little thing I show everybody for fun here. So, just because I know it's already at 8 o'clock. Okay, so here I've got this like little open modal. Now, again, like with, what I was talking about, like with buttons, making sure buttons do perform actions, they open a modal, they submit a form, links navigate. Here you'll notice it's communicated as a button. So again, if I'm not able to see that, I'm expecting it to open something. I'm expecting it to do something. I've got that good, clear label. I have seen instances where people have like, there was one I've tested before where it was like the little information icons next to a label where you could get more information about a particular topic, and people just had them labeled as more info and didn't have them like linked to the other label for extra context. Didn't, visually, again, I see that little info icon right next to this term. I can visually guess what it means. But if all someone's hearing is just more info, more info, more info, it's like, well, what is it more info on? What is this meant to do? Or if, like, again, if someone has it set up as a link instead of a button, well, wait, is it taking me somewhere? Where is it taking me? I don't know. But here I've got, open an example modal, so I know it's going to open a little modal. It's going to let me know. I don't have that properly coded though, because you're able to tap behind it. But yeah, and actually that's something too that we look for, like when I'm testing things, is like if someone does open like a modal, there are ways programmatically that you keep them from tabbing behind it, so that they can actually close it, because otherwise they tab behind it and then they might not be able to get back to it, and that can be fun from even from like a visual standpoint. That's problematic, because someone could be just using a keyboard because they can't use a mouse very well, and suddenly they're stuck and they can't see anything, and they actually might get a better experience with a screen reader at that point. But yeah, that's sort of some of the things like that we're using when we're testing with screen readers, or just accessibility testing in general. And I guess with that, I'll go back here. I'll close that. I do first off want to thank everybody that showed up, and anybody that's in the stream right now. I can't see like questions there. There's none? Okay. Awesome. Hopefully that means I've been informative enough, or I've just overwhelmed people with too much. It's one of the two. But I would appreciate any feedback. I do have an email address on here. It's just accessibility@coredev.com. I really would appreciate feedback on this if you don't mind, because anything, if there's particular things you prefer I focus on, if there's something I focused on way too much, greatly appreciate it. Thank you. ask any questions you have. I'm more than happy to answer.
So how do you switch between mobile and desktop testing for stuff? You just like rerun the whole checklist over again on the cell phone and like on the iPhone and everything?
You want to do like a decent bit of it. Some of it you can just sort of skim, depending on like how complex things are, you can kind of skim through it because you kind of know how it's supposed to read off at that point, especially if you're doing both. So you can kind of quickly go through it maybe at that point and just listen. Okay, does everything sound consistent? Is it being read off, consistently from what I can tell? Am I actually able to like get to everything? There obviously it's different. There are some differences because, especially if you're dealing with like mobile web versus like a native app, users typically have different expectations for how things are going to be organized or how they're going to navigate the flow. For instance, if you go to like an app and it has like the main menu across the bottom, okay, well, that's probably where your focus order is going to. It might start down there and then go back to like the top, and that wouldn't be as odd for someone versus on like a regular website. You're going to be expecting it to start from the top and typically go left to right, top to bottom, kind of like reading a book in English. I do specify English there because, of course, obviously, if it's in a different language, there's going to be a different reading order to that. Which that's where like internationalization comes into play a lot, right there, though.
Oh, that's good.
Yep. Well, I mean, and that's something that you do have to consider too when you're doing like testing with screen readers, because like language elements is the language element actually switching when you switch the language on the page, or is it still saying it's English when it's all in Bosnian or Chinese, or Japanese or whatever it happens to be in. Because screen readers will pick up on that and it will impact how they pronounce things, and that can have some interesting consequences there.
I'm kind of curious what you do when you talk to them.
It actually will I'm trying to remember. I mean, it partially depends on like how you program it. Because I have actually had to run into that a little bit. Most of the stuff I've been testing since I started working where I'm at now has been just English only. I've had a couple of things where like they had some like Hindi text and things like that, and it was interesting to figure out, okay, well, how should we organize this, because the reading order is different. Like where they put their verbs in their sentence structure is going to be a lot different, or like reading right to left. So that gets interesting at times.
Yes, it was all the problems I had earlier in my career with testing was trying to handle the exponential sort of explosion of test cases and different environments that you're running. So you have all the OSs and all the browsers and all the screen readers. If you're doing international, if you're doing all the languages too, that can easily get into the thousands. Unfortunately, they're multiplying all those together. How do you go about handling sort of the exponential explosion of possible combinations to keep it all managed?
Honestly, I mean, it kind of, in a way, it comes back to like what I said when it comes to like mobile versus like desktop web.
Yeah.
To some degree, I mean, obviously, if it's in different languages, then you want to have someone else who actually understands that language, at least give it a once over to make sure you're not inadvertently having stuff pronounced in a way that is profanity or something, but it's still communicating similar information. But I mean, it's not really, because most accessibility testing, it goes by like the particular guidelines that are like required. So there's not quite as bad of like I guess the explosion, because usually what we'll do is, and I've seen this happen like across multiple different companies, that they'll have it where they just have their main set of test cases. It'll be like they'll have at least one for like each guideline. Maybe they'll have like 3 or 4 for a single guideline, because like some of the guidelines do have like the image alt text ones.
Yeah.
There's like a test for like, are there informative images, decorative, CSS, CAPTCHAs. And typically what you'll see people do is they get to a test case and they test with all the combinations on that one test case before they go to the next one.
That's what usually scares me, because that could be a lot.
Well, or I have seen some too where like they'll have the same set of test cases, but maybe they just like they split it up between desktop, mobile, PDF, whatnot, and they'll just the steps just change based on which one you're doing. But you still have like the separate sets of testing, and you'll typically in those instances you'll just do it one at a time. So like you'll just do your desktop, and the most you're having to do is like Mac, Windows. Obviously on Windows you have the multiple screen readers because typically people will test with at least JAWS and NVDA because those are like the two like top ones that people use.
Right.
And then typically at least Chrome and Firefox, since those are like the two most common browsers basically. And again, that too is also going to depend too on your user base, because if you know that your users have to use Android phones, they have to use Firefox, maybe because of corporate policy.
Right.
Obviously, that's going to impact how much you're going to be testing at that point, or where you put your focus at least.
Appreciate it.
In any in chat?
Nope.
They are able to hear me though?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I got that fixed. Again,
Screen reader is engaged, well, thinking mainly of like a web browser. Does the web browser know that?
No. And that's very intentional. In fact, even in a lot of operating systems and such, they will not often allow the developer to identify if the user is using a screen reader. And that's to prevent people forcing someone to disclose their conditions. Because otherwise, if you're automatically detecting that someone has a screen reader, and it also kind of also comes down to the fact that if things are accessible, it shouldn't matter if someone comes to it with a screen reader. But also if you don't want to force people to disclose, and so they typically don't make that available to the developers and such, so that they're not. Especially because you run into a lot of issues where, unfortunately, and Simi had to deal with this a little bit myself, there tends to be a lot of retaliation when people find out that someone has a disability, unfortunately. You especially see it in employment. I have seen, thankfully this one I have not had to deal with, but I have seen instances where someone was in an interview process, mentioned that they were blind, and suddenly just the interviews stopped. They just got ghosted. It was kind of a little obvious at that point. It's like people just immediately made the assumption that they weren't going to be able to do the job just because they were blind, and it was a developer role. So yeah, they totally could have, but that's again, it's one of those things they intentionally don't expose that to the developers. So yeah, I know iOS in particular. I've actually seen when I was looking through, because they all have an accessibility API. Windows actually has an accessibility API. Mac OS, iOS, TalkBack. There's usually an accessibility API for each one of them. And a lot of times you'll actually see in there, if you can do a search and you'll see where someone has asked, is there a way to know if the screen reader's turned on? And it'll be no, sorry. Yeah.
awesome, thanks.
Thank you all so much. I always enjoy this. I should. I think I've got potentially.
Yeah, you got a good talk. Thank you on from online. All right, everyone. Thank you so much.
I think I've got like possibly 50